Yo guys, what's going on? I'm Tim Kelly along with Justin God. See if you can hear my voice. I'm a little under the weather, but the 30 clubs, 30 previews MLB special must go on. This is presented by The Real Sports Talk and the Nation Sports Blog. I'm Tim Kelly along with Justin God. See, we've been doing this special for a few years now, and we continue on with our third annual MLB 30 Clubs 30 Preview Special as we look today at the Cleveland Indians, who last season went 68-94. This offseason, they took some steps to hopefully make sure that does not repeat itself in 2013. That first step was bringing in Terry Francona, the longtime Boston Red Sox manager, as their brand new manager. In the offseason, they made a big deal signing Nick Swisher to a 4-year, $52 million deal. A couple weeks ago then, they added on and gave themselves a very solid outfield by adding Michael Bourn into the equation, and they made a few minor league deals that I would say are smart. I don't know if they were good moves because I don't know if they're going to work out, but they're low-risk, high-reward type moves. They signed Daisuke Matsuzaka, and no matter what anyone says about Daisuke, he has always had the potential if he can stay healthy. Giovanni Soto has a ton of power for a catcher. If he can get that average back up, then they have someone who they can bring in as a backup catcher this year. Jason Giambi, they signed to a minor league deal. He still has some use off the bench and ultimately could be a future hitting coach type candidate for this team, whether it's in the minor leagues or at a major league level. Scott Kazmir, who once was a very good pitcher with the Tampa Bay Rays, was pitching on the same team that Roger Clemens threw 5 innings for in an independent league, the Skeeters, I think they were called, and Scott Kazmir looked very good there. We'll see what happens as he returns to the MLB. Matt Capps has the ability to be a very good closer and just a valuable piece in this bullpen, whether it be as a setup man or whether this team decides to move on from Chris Perez at some point. And then the final move, they brought back Ben Francisco, who they traded away with Cliff Lee 3 or 4 years ago now. They brought him back on a minor league deal. He could potentially provide some outfield depth at AAA and maybe even at the MLB level once the rosters expand. So, Justin, it was a smart offseason. It remains to be seen if some of these moves will ultimately work out, but I like what they did, bringing in 2 veteran outfielders and then taking some low-risk moves.
They did nothing that I actually would think that the Cleveland Indians would go out and do. This is a team who, after years and years of losing, not making the playoffs, they go out in the free agency, saving their money up, and were able to sign big league free agents like Michael Bourn, who's going to be starting in center field. Phenomenal move. This just signifies that they're going to be moving on from Grady Sizemore, who has been injury with this guy. So, his ass is out of Cleveland, and he's now a free agent. Now there's possible rumors that he could be going to the New York Mets, who also had interest in Michael Bourn, but Grady Sizemore is now out of the picture in Cleveland. They also got outfielder Nick Swisher, who is going to be the permanent first baseman, and they also got Mark Reynolds, who's been playing with the Baltimore Orioles last year. They got him over to Cleveland, who's going to be their everyday designated hitter, which is a smart move because when you look at their outfield, you got Brantley, who we're going to get to later, you got Bourne in center, and you got Drew Stubbs, who was potentially to be the starting center fielder when they got him over in the Sid Chu trade from the Cincinnati Reds. Drew Stubbs has been moved over to right. I like that also, putting Nick Swisher in as the everyday first baseman, making Carlos Santana their everyday catcher, because Carlos Santana last year has been changing from catcher over to first baseman. Now, looking at their minor league deals, I really like this as well because they're adding depth to a really questionable pitching rotation and also a really questionable and young bullpen. They got Daisuke Matsuzaka, who can still be effective somewhere down the line. They got Scott Kazmir, who is one of my favorite pitchers in baseball. A lot of people are like, oh, Scott Kazmir. But when you look at the guy with the Tampa Bay Rays, I really like what Kazmir did with the Rays. But when he went over to the Angels, he had a decent one decent season. Then he had one awful season, which led him down to a single-A independent ball team with the Skeeters, like Tim, you said. And then you got Matt Capps from the Minnesota Twins, where it's going to be more than likely he could be an late-inning reliever this year. I don't see him starting the year down at the AAA level. And You know what? I really like this too. They also brought in Brett Myers, Jason Giambi. I mean, the depth that this team acquired this offseason is going to set them up to be a true contender in this year's MLB season.
So they get rid of Shin-Soo Choo. They get rid of who's the other outfielder that they had? Who else did they have in center field?
I think Grady Sizemore.
Yeah, great. Okay, so they get rid of Shin-Soo Choo and Grady Sizemore. They add in Michael Bourne, who's one of the best leadoff hitters in the game right now. He'll strike out a lot, but he's one of the best leadoff hitters in the game. Drew Stubbs, who has, I still think, the talent to be a really, really good outfielder. Nick Swisher, who's a great locker room presence. He's been a solid player for the New York Yankees, for the Oakland A's. Wasn't really solid when he was with the White Sox for that 1 year, but he's a good influence on this team. He's a veteran. Mark Reynolds, again, another guy who will strike out a ton, but he's a great bat. And then Brett Myers, who I failed to mention earlier, but Brett Myers is a solid number 3 starter, and if things don't work out in the rotation, you could ultimately look at him as someone that you can maybe see in the bullpen, because he has been in that role in both Philadelphia and in Houston. So, solid offseason. Let's begin looking at their team, and we'll start with Mark Reynolds, who will be their DH. Reynolds' last 2 seasons hit exactly .221, but both seasons in 2011 he hit 37 home runs. Last year he hit 23 home runs. I think for Mark Reynolds to truly be worth all the strikeouts that he's going to have, close to 200 in 2011 and about 160 last year, and then close to a 220 average, he needs to hit 30-plus home runs. So if he does what he did again last year in Baltimore, 23 home runs, I really have to question how valuable he is to this team.
I think he's going to be very valuable to this team because he's also going to be carrying a nice workload as well. He's going to be one of those, power hitters that needs to have a great season for this team, and this team is really going to be a contender. Because Mark Reynolds, if you look back to his early days with the Arizona Diamondbacks, this guy had phenomenal power, improving every year instead of 2010 where he had more strikeouts than any person in Major League Baseball. I think what he needs to do is he needs to go back to the 2009 Mark Reynolds. That's what we're hoping that you can get out of him, where he hit close to 44 home runs. Do you think he's going to hit 44 home runs again? It's up in the air right now, but his power went down a little bit with the Baltimore Orioles instead of 2011. Last year wasn't the most efficient season for him, but he needs to get that average up a little bit, and I think with him being a DH, not being as a position player, is going to be a smart move from Terry Francona, who's the new head coach, and placing him at DH.
Now, at catcher, they have another guy who's moved around. That's Carlos Santana, a guy who I still believe has the potential to be a top 5 catcher. He's a switch hitter. That's valuable to your team. And if you can get the power that you got in 2011, where he hit 27 home runs, then Carlos Santana is going to be valuable to this team. He had 80 RBIs that year, and I still think there's room for improvement from Carlos Santana. Last year, got the average up over 250, but dropped to 18 home runs and 76 RBIs. Overall, this is an Indians lineup that needs the power because they're going to strike out a lot. There's no doubt about that. They're not going to be the greatest team at getting on base, but if they get the power, then it's worth the low averages and it's worth some of the strikeouts that they're going to take, and Carlos Santana fits right into that mold. I think now that he's settling in at catcher at one position, that should help him not only in the field but at the plate.
I think this is the future best catcher overall in Major League Baseball, once Yadier Molina is going to be gone. And, once the time for the younger catchers to come up, I think Carlos Santana is going to lead the pack in younger catchers. Because when you look at Carlos Santana, I honestly think we still have not seen the full Carlos Santana yet. Even though he has played full seasons, I think Carlos Santana could be a guy who could potentially hit 25 home runs. Because, when you look at his power swing, when he played down at A-ball, when he played down in, in the minor leagues, in particular for the Cleveland Indians, including when he came up to the Major League level, he has solid power. And he really needs to bring up that average. I think this is going to be a potential 300 hitter at the catcher's role. I think it's going to be overall a great upcoming year for Carlos Santana. I think this year he can bat up to 22 home runs if he just gets more power to his swing.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. Backing him up is another former top prospect. That's Lou Marson, a former top prospect in the Phillies organization, who was a key piece that they got in the Cliff Lee trade. He has never really panned out. Last year, another disappointing season. Hit 226, 0 home runs, 30 RBIs. This is just a guy who's never really found it as an overall hitter at the MLB level. In the minors, when he was with the Phillies minor league system, he looked like someone who could be good in the minor league level, and then came up to the MLB level for Philadelphia. It never looked great, and then came over to Cleveland, and it's never worked out. I think he's a respectable catcher behind the plate, but he's such a bad hitter at the plate that you're going to be talking about Carlos Santana playing pretty much every day.
Yeah, I agree with that. When you look at Lou Martin with the Philadelphia Phillies, or not with the Philadelphia Phillies, when you looked overall in his MLB career, exactly with the Cleveland Indians, you know, he's been up and down in the minor league system. He's been used as a reserve. I still think that, you know, if you're going to be getting, you know, 100% out of Lou Martin, I think what he needs to do is he needs to improve on his swing a little bit more. He's not going to go out there and impress you with home runs. I think the highest of his career in the major leagues at home runs was, 3 in 2010 is what I'm looking up on his stats right now. I think Lou Martin can be a solid average hit, like an average hitting kind of catcher, but, you know, power is just not there with Lou Martin.
No, it's not. In general, I'm not sure hitting is. Yan Gomes is another option coming over from Toronto in 43 games last year. He had 204 with 4 home runs, 13 RBIs. He might be a bit of an upgrade at the plate, but behind the plate, Lou Martin's probably going to be your better option as a catcher. Nick Swisher is going to be taking over at first, as we mentioned before. Here's a guy who for 6 straight years now has hit 20-plus home runs. He's been very consistent in his time with the A's, wasn't great with the White Sox, and then over to New York. He's just had very good success as an MLB hitter. The one key thing I think to remember is you're taking him out of a lineup that had Curtis Granderson, Derek Jeter, A-Rod, the list goes on, a very good New York Yankees lineup, Robinson Cano, a very good Yankees lineup. You're taking him out of that. You're taking him away from the short right field porch in New York. So it's going to be an adjustment for Nick Swisher, but I still see a guy that can hit 265, 22, 23 home runs, and I think you can't underestimate what he will mean to this team in the clubhouse.
I think this is going to be one of the best, well, not one of the best. I think Nick Swisher is going to have a heavy workload on him this year because he's going to be the everyday first baseman for the Cleveland Indians. And, you know, it's different because Nick Swisher is so used to playing in the outfield, but yet again, he does have great experience playing at first base. Now, is he going to be a top 10 first base in Major League Baseball? No. Is he going to give you a nice solid defense over at first base? Yes. But what he needs to do this upcoming year is, I think he can have a repeat from last year, but he needs to be consistent all year because this is a guy who is notable and is for going on long period of time of slumps throughout the season. He needs to be all year round, has to be on top of his game. He just cannot be affording to go into slumps right now.
Yeah, and it's a lot of it is going to depend how guys around him do, because taking him out of that big lineup, you need production out of Mark Reynolds, you need production out of Carlos Santana, all these guys, because ultimately, if you don't get production, then he's not going to see pitches. Over at second base, we're looking at Jason Kipnis, a guy who really should have been an all-star last year, in my opinion, and he struggled down the stretch, but he had a good first half, and in Cleveland, as they still attempt to move on from LeBron James, the new thing is we are all Kipnises instead of we are all witnesses. Just thought I'd throw that in there. Last year, Kipnis hit 257 with 14 home runs and 76 RBIs, stole 31 bases, and did a very fine job in the field. I like Jason Kipnis a lot. He's still very young, and this is a guy who is going to be one of the faces of this team for a long time to come.
The face of Arizona State, the pride of the Arizona State Sun Devils at their baseball. I mean, looking at this guy over at Arizona State, there was a lot of promise for him going up into the prospects level of the Cleveland Indians. When he reached the level of the Major League level of the Cleveland Indians, I was so happy for him. I'm a huge fan of Kipnis. I got the opportunity to meet him when I was a young kid when I went to the Arizona State games. A very great up-and-coming player in Major League Baseball. You know, last year, Tim, you were correct. He did, fall down the stretch. But this guy is promising great defense, great hitting. You know, he can average you about 15 home runs a year. I mean, last year he got 14 home runs, which is actually good at my point because he got you 76 RBIs. But you know what? I think this is a guy who is another potential 288 to 290 type of hitter. 300 is going to be big for him on a good year. So I think Jason Kipnis does have a lot of promise over there at second, and I really am a huge fan of his backup as well.
Yeah, his backup that we're looking at is Micah Vilas coming over from Boston. Micah Vilas had a pretty productive season last year in Boston, hitting .250 with 13 home runs, 60 RBIs, stealing 14 bases. He has the ability to play shortstop, second base, and third base. He has a lot of pop, so I like Micah Vilas as a backup at all three of those positions. And ultimately, I could see him potentially being this team's starting shortstop into the future, because I believe at some point we are going to see Asdrubal Cabrera traded, whether that's this year, next year, I don't know when, but this is a guy whose name was floated out there in some Justin Upton rumors this offseason, and ultimately Asdrubal Cabrera is a solid shortstop. It's right there at short, 9 stolen bases last year, 16 home runs at .270 average. He's a very good shortstop, but he's not an irreplaceable guy. He's a guy that is enjoyable to watch, but a few years ago he looked like he had the potential to be a superstar, and I think it's pretty evident at this point that's not what he is.
I think the smart move for the Cleveland Indians right now is to hold on to Asdrubal Cabrera. Yes, his name was thrown out with the trade with the Diamondbacks on a potential, Trevor Bauer, who came over here to the Cleveland Indians. But his name was mentioned for, Trevor Bauer for Asdrubal Cabrera. But I think overall that he needs to stay in Cleveland because, you know what, he is a long tenured player of the team so far right now. And, he plays phenomenal baseball defensively and hitting-wise. .270 last year, I can take that. 16 home runs, 68 RBIs, but the way that this guy plays defense is just phenomenal. And I think this is a must-keep for this team. Now, looking at his backup, I'm a huge fan of Micah Vilas, who they acquired along with Yan Gomes from the Toronto Blue Jays, because it was just a chaotic offseason for Micah Vilas as well, being traded from, Boston Red Sox over to the, not traded, actually I think it was signed as a free agent to Toronto, then they traded him to Cleveland. I think overall Micah Vilas is going to be, another player you want to look out for, because he's going to be carrying as a backup to Lonnie Chisenhall over at third base. But you also got an up-and-coming prospect named, I think his name is Juan Diaz, because this is a guy who down in the minor league system has been playing phenomenal defense. He can steal bases, and that's what they really need right now. And I think that his stolen base can go up a little bit in Juan Diaz, but you know what, it's a work in progress with him, and I can see him making the major league level at some point this year, somewhere down when the rosters get extended.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. Looking over at third base is Lonnie Chisenhall, who will finally get his first chance to be a full-time starter over at third base. Last year in 43 games, hit .268, 5 home runs, 16 RBIs, stole 2 bases, was pretty productive for them. I don't know exactly what to expect. If things work out well, then fine, you have a solid third baseman. If things don't work out well, then you have a very solid bench piece in Micah Vilas that is going to be very valuable to this team. So either way, and you also have the ability to put Mark Reynolds over at third base if worse comes to worse. So you have other options than Lonnie Chisenhall, but I anticipate he will have a pretty good season.
I don't really think that Lonnie Chisenhall is going to be the full-time third baseman this year because, you know what, there's just something about him that he does go through a slump throughout his career. Yes, he has not played a full season of Major League Baseball, but, you know what, down in his minor league camp, I mean, it's just very questionable at this point, going from AAA to, Major League Baseball, having a split season last year due to some injury concerns as well. I honestly think that once, the dog months of like July and August, you're going to be seeing Micah Vilas as the everyday third baseman.
I don't know what to expect. It depends on what Lonnie Chisenhall does. If he doesn't produce, then yeah, you have that option of using Lonnie Chisenhall. Maybe they add another piece who can play DH and they move Mark Reynolds to third base. Again, Lonnie Chisenhall comes into this year with his first chance to be a full-time starter, but ultimately he's on a short leash in my mind. That's the way I look at it. In left field, you have Michael Brantley, and one of the things I love about this outfield is you have a very versatile outfield. Michael Brantley can play all three positions, a natural center fielder. Brantley last year at .288, 6 home runs, 12 stolen bases, 60 RBIs. A solid player. He's a very good fielder, so that's what you like about him, and he's still very young for this team. He's one of the questions I have, because if he can have like a breakout season or a better season than last year, then this is a very formidable lineup. If he struggles or takes a step back, then you have more questions about this team.
I love this outfield because it's stacked top to bottom with, with speed and also with great defensive ability. But Michael Brantley in particular brings something special to the plate. He brings a solid average. He's not going to wow you with home runs every single year. He's going to wow you with the type of defense that he plays and his on-base percentage. Because when you look at it, Michael Brantley is always that guy you always see on base. This guy has phenomenal speed, can steal you bases here and there, but, he's not going to be as, often as Michael Bourne's going to be this year or in past years for Michael Bourne. But this guy can get on base, and he does bring a nice solid average to the lineup.
Now, backing him up in left field is going to be Ezekiel Carrera. Last year, Carrera, in 48 games, hit 272, 2 home runs, 11 RBIs. The place that he's going to be valuable is as a defensive replacement in this outfield, and then also on the base paths. He stole 8 bases in 9 attempts last year. In the minors, he had very, very good success, stealing above 30 bases in 2011, and then 26 last year. So he is going to be a valuable piece of this team off of the bench. And another guy who's going to be very valuable on the base pass is Michael Bourne. Here's a guy who is a great leadoff hitter. He struggled last year in terms of his consistency at the plate, hitting only 274, but I anticipate that average gets back over 285, 290 this year. I think he steps back into being a good leadoff hitter. He's only going to hit you about 6 or 7 home runs, 50 RBIs, but what he brings is the best base stealer in the MLB over the last 5 seasons, having stolen 40-plus bases 5 years in a row. He's going to be extremely valuable on the base paths and as a leadoff hitter to this team.
I love this whole concept of what the Cleveland Indians did this year. I mean, they brought in so many great guys, but Michael Bourne, puts the lighter to the candle there, because Michael Bourne is just a phenomenal overall player. Yes, last year due to consistency issues, his average did go down a little bit, but Tim, I also do have to agree with you that I think his average can go up a little bit. And you know what? When you look at it, I do expect that Michael Bourne does get back on the same path stolen base-wise. 42 stolen bases last year, 38 stolen bases could be a solid year for him. I overall like Michael Bourne for this team.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Moving over to right field is where we're going to look at Drew Stubbs. Again, backing up Michael Bourne, who's going to be an everyday guy with how much they paid him. You have the option of Drew Stubbs. You also have Ezekiel Carrera, and if things don't work out, you could have Michael Brantley as an option over in center field as well. Drew Stubbs will be your starter in right field, taking over for Shin-Soo Choo, one of the pieces he was traded for. Drew Stubbs is a guy in 2010, came up at the same time as when we saw Jay Bruce and Joey Votto really get going, and I thought that this is going to be one of the brightest pieces for this team. And ultimately, the last 2 years, he struggled at the plate, hitting under 250 both seasons, and then last year slipping to 213 with 14 home runs. But the thing that he brings, another very good base stealer. He's stolen over 30 bases 4 years in a row. He has a lot of pop, and I anticipate him hitting closer to 16 or 17 home runs this year. And I think a change of scenery for Drew Stubbs is ultimately what is going to make him successful in 2013.
I think when you look at Drew Stubbs, I'm not too in on Drew Stubbs right now, because when you look at his last year's totals, he hit 14 home runs. That's pretty impressive for an outfielder. 40 RBIs, I think that could be brought up a little bit. And that 213 average just really questions me a whole lot, because he needs to be more consistent. I mean, that's the only issue with this team, is the consistency of the free agents they brought in. Matt Capps, Nick Swisher has had consistency issues. I think you're getting Drew Stubbs who they got from Shin-Soo Choo trade. I still think that the Indians could have gotten more in return for Choo, but you know what? You cannot go wrong with Drew Stubbs, who can get you home runs every once in a while. I'm not going to say like this guy's going to be on highlights hitting home runs every day, but you know what? Every once in a while that's going to be good for him just to get runs on the board. And he also got the great defensive ability. This guy can hit triples. That's also really good for him. So I really like this. It's kind of in the middle for me, to be honest.
The lineup you're going to get production from, it's a matter of consistency. The rotation, you don't even know if you're getting that production from. We begin with their ace, who's Justin Masterson. 2 years ago had a very good season, 12-10, 3.21 ERA, threw a complete game, and then last year really regressed, going 11-15 with an ERA just under 5. Both seasons over 200 innings, so that's solid. But your ace, to come into a season where you really anticipate a huge turnaround, with your ace having had a 4.93 ERA last year, this is where the questions begin with the Cleveland Indians.
Yeah, I love how Justin Matson was able to turn around his season last year due to, like, his pitching was great, but you know what, the run support was just not that. I think Justin Matheson can be a great pitcher in baseball, but he just needs the hitting behind him to help him out and get him out of jams and everything, and also the great defensive baseball. I think Justin Matheson can come in this season to be a solid 13-win pitcher.
Yeah, and ultimately, though, I think they're going to need more. And another guy they're going to need more from is Ubaldo Jimenez. I don't know what to think. He has always had the greatest potential. He was dirty with the Rockies in 2010. And ultimately, in 2011, did not work out. They moved him to the Indians, where he struggled with both teams, really. And then last year, 9-17 with a 5.40 ERA. For me, this is a year where Ubaldo Jimenez comes in saying that he's cleaned some things up, he's worked on some mechanics. Either it's going to work out this year, or the ship has really sailed for Ubaldo Jimenez.
I wouldn't say right now the ship has sailed. I still think he has some sort of depth in him. I think he can really come into this season and get a big turnaround, because look at last year. Totally awful pitching from Ubaldo Jimenez. I mean, that's just setting the facts straight there. 9-17 with a 5.40 ERA. A big workload's going to be on him because he really needs to get back to the form that what we saw in 2010. My expectations for Ubaldo Jimenez is to get back into the double-digit win column. I can see this guy being a potential 13 to 14 win pitcher this year.
At the number 3 spot, Brett Myers is going to get the nod. He actually spent most of the season closing games last year in Chicago. I don't know ultimately what to anticipate out of a closing game in Houston and then transition into the rotation in Chicago. I don't know what to expect out of Brett Myers because he had success last year as a starter, went 3-4 with a 3.12 ERA. That was in limited time in Chicago. He had a very good year in 2010 in Houston, but he's also had some years mixed in there like 2011, like 2008 and 2009, where really overall as a starter he has not been very good. So with questions all throughout this rotation, Brett Myers is one of these guys that you need to kind of stabilize this. He's not going to be a Cy Young type guy, but you need him to have an ERA at about 3.60, 3.70.
Absolutely. I mean, his record last year didn't really surprise you. It was 3-8. He had an ERA at 3.31, which was actually pretty solid for, with his role with the Chicago White Sox, mixing it in from a bullpen pitcher to a starting pitcher. If it doesn't work out in the starting rotation, you can also place him in the bullpen, where he has had, some great success with the Houston Astros, with the Philadelphia Phillies also as a starting pitcher. But we can also look into their minor league system where you can also be replacing him at. But, that's somewhere down the line when we get down later into the pitching rotation. But you know what? I think what you really need out of Brett Myers this year, you really need to have him as the best pitcher as he can be this year. I think when you're going into this year, he's gonna be number 3 in the pitching rotation. That's really smart to place him in. He's not gonna be number 4 or number 5. But having him at number 3 it's going to be a big question because, like I said, if he doesn't work out, you can place him in, but you can also have reserves. He needs to be that pitcher as we saw, back with Houston in Houston in 2010, where he went 14-8 with a 3.14 ERA. If they don't have it, that kind of Brett Myers from 2010, then you could be in some hot dirt right now.
I don't know if hot dirt is exactly how I would say it, but I get your point there. At the number 4 spot, we're looking at Zach McAllister, who last year with the Cleveland Indians went 6-8, 4.24 ERA. That was in 125 innings in AAA. He actually performed very well, 5-2, ERA under 3. So the 4.24, it actually was not bad for a rookie or a guy actually in his second experience in the big league, but his first really full-time experience last year. And I believe that if he can get that ERA down to closer to 4, even maybe a little bit under 4, then ultimately the Indians have a pretty respectable number 4 starter. The problem is there's still questions with that 1 to 3.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Zach McAllister, when you look at him for the future, he has a bright future with the Cleveland Indians. And, when you look at him, he has a nice velocity on his fastball. He has great control on his fastball. When you look at his other pitches, he throws a nice curveball and a sinker. And I think that's going to be a great, triple combo there for him in his pitching mechanics. Now, the only question I have about him is the consistency he has. And, he's going to be coming in full-time in the pitching rotation. He just needs to bring that ERA down a little bit lower. And I think he's going to be fitting in right at home with Cleveland.
Now, at the number 5 spot, Carlos Carrasco fits in. He was once one of the big pieces in the Cliff Lee trade, and he was always a guy in the minor leagues that they said, either this guy's going to be great or he's never going to figure it out, and so far it's been option B, because in 2009, 0-4, 8.87 ERA. 2010, the only time where he's been even close to successful, he had a 3.83 ERA, and that was only in 7 games, and then last year in 21 starts, went 8-9 with a 4.62 ERA. He's your number 5 starter at this point, so it's tough for me to absolutely blast him because the expectations have changed. But ultimately, if Carlos Carrasco is going to really help this team and keep himself in that pitching rotation, because the Indians do have other options, if he's going to keep himself there, then he has to get that ERA at least down to like 4.20, 4.30 in that area. And ultimately, I still believe that he is a disappointment at the major league level at this point.
Now, when you look at the final 2 pitchers in their pitching rotation, it's just very questionable, Tim. You really set that up really straight with Carlos Carrasco, how it's really questionable with him. But when you look at Carlos Carrasco, he does give you a nice fastball, and he does eat up a lot of innings. But that's not going to really be good enough right now. If they have a nice farm system that they're going to be possibly end up using in this pitching rotation sometime this upcoming year, because one guy that really comes to mind that can also be contending for a pitching spot in the rotation is none other than Nick Hagedorn, a guy who I personally interviewed back when MLB Baseball Blogs was around. But Nick Hagedorn's another contender that can be in contention of being in this pitching rotation. Now, when you look at the number 6 guy, not to jump ahead of you, Tim, but Trevor Bauer was another accusation that we forgot to mention to you guys. Now, he leaves the Arizona Diamondbacks, and you know what? There was just not a good vibe in the locker room with Trevor Bauer. Miguel Montero was interviewed on Bauer, and he said that Trevor Bauer didn't want to listen. And you know what, Trevor Bauer is still very, very, very young, and he does have a bright career. But when you look at his time last year with the Arizona Diamondbacks, it was not well. I don't think it's really a good option for him to start the season at the major league level as the number 6 hold. I think you should give it down to maybe a Brian Shaw, who he also acquired along with Trevor Bauer in the deal that sent Shin-Soo Choo over to the Reds, and the Diamondbacks got a couple of prospects in hand. But you know what, I'm not 100% really set in stone in on Carlos Carrasco and Trevor Bauer at this point.
Yeah, and the number 6 hole would be the long reliever in the bullpen, so ultimately one of those guys is going to fill that role. Remember, they have some other options on their team. They have Daisuke Matsuzaka, they have Rich Hill on their roster. There's some other options that this team has, and ultimately there's a lot of questions at the back, not even the back end, the entire rotation for this team. There are a lot of questions. A guy that they picked up in the offseason was Matt Albers, coming over after spending last season with the Arizona Diamondbacks and with the Boston Red Sox. He's going to be their setup man. Last year went 1-1 with a 2.57 ERA with the Diamondbacks. Then with the Boston Red Sox went 2-0 with a 2.29 ERA. Was very solid for both teams. Chris Perez, who there's been trade rumors about, he will stay around. He signed a 1-year deal. Last year saved 39 out of 43 games. The last 2 or 3 years, he's really been a pretty effective closer for this team. Although he will give up runs when it comes to save situations, he normally will get the job done, having blown only 4 saves each of the last 3 seasons.
Chris Perez, there were a lot of rumors of trade talks during the offseason with this guy, but it's a good move that they're going to be holding on to Chris Perez for another season, because Chris Perez, when he's playing great baseball, you're getting the best out of Chris Perez, and that's what they need this year. With the hitting us coming in with Michael Bourn, Nick Swisher, and everything, this is going to get this team an opportunity to have a good pitching staff, because they're going to back them up with runs on the board, and the pitchers can work with it. But when it comes down to Chris Perez, I think he's going to come back and have a decent season. That's what they need 100% out of him, pretty much. But when you look over at Matt Albers, Tim, you did make a good point that Matt Albers is going to be a solid setup man for him. But you know what? You still also got to look at the guys who they also acquired during the offseason. You got Matt Capps. Even though he's not a non-roster invite, he could be starting the season down at the AAA level. I honestly do not see that. I think Matt Capps he will not blow you away during the spring training, but he will impress you to make that final league roster. But I still think that Matt Albers will end up either contending for the setup man. I still think Matt Capps has a lot in him to get that role. going into spring training, which starts today. But you know what? I'm really solid with this bullpen. I really like what they have top to bottom. They have Perez, Albers, Matt Capps, Hagedorn, David Huff, Pistano, and Brian Shaw. All these guys are actually really solid. And you also have another up-and-coming pitcher in Scott Kazmir, who's trying to revive his MLB career.
Yeah, and again, if some of those options, like if Brett Myers doesn't work out, they can move him to the bullpen. If Matt Cap steps up, if those two things happen, then ultimately, if the Indians are not contending, Chris Perez becomes expendable and could be a piece we see moved at the trade deadline. Justin, as with this entire AL Central, except maybe the Tigers, there's certainly potential in this team, but there's not a lot of certainty. And where are you looking at them at record-wise this season?
You know what? With the acquirements of Swisher, Michael Bourn, Asdrubal Cabrera playing good, Carlos Santana, this team really improved this offseason. You're getting a new management under Terry Francona, and you know what? It's going to be a tough race in this American League Central. You got the White Sox, you got the Indians who got revamped, you got the Detroit Tigers, you got the up-and-coming Kansas City Royals, but you know what? That Minnesota Twins team is still right there at the bottom. They got to get everything going. When we're looking at the Cleveland Indians, it's going to be a four-way race. I have them either in, it's hard to say, but you know what? I have them in third place this year. I think that the Cleveland Indians are going to fall short of second place, even though with this great pitching, not great pitching, the great hitting around. I think the pitching rotation is still questionable. I think that's going to hold the team back a little. I think they failed to acquire another pitcher on the market. There are still pitchers out there. Got Kyle Loesch out there. I think if they could somehow get the money to go out there and acquire him, I think that could change my decision. But you know what? As of right now, I think that pitching is just going to be the issue right now for me. I think they're going to be in a close race against Kansas City and Detroit, and I have them in third place.
I have them in third place, and look, they made some great improvements to this lineup, but I ultimately see a 74-win, 75-win team because there's so much uncertainty with this team, even with the moves they've made. You're not sure what you're getting out of Carlos Santana. You're not sure what you're getting out of Drew Stubbs, Asdrubal Cabrera, and the entire pitching rotation. So ultimately, I think this is a team, remember, 74, 75 wins is still an improvement. This is a team that won 64 games. I do believe they're headed in the right direction, but Kansas City has improved big time this offseason, and with just the evolution of some of their guys, with the Tigers getting back Victor Martinez to a team that already went to the World Series, and then ultimately the White Sox were in contention down to the last week of the season last year too, so they're going to be right there to be threatened with. I'm not sure about the Twins, but I see the Cleveland Indians in third or fourth place this season. That is our preview of the Cleveland Indians for the 2013 MLB season. I'm Tim Kelly. He's Justin Godsey. This is the Real Sports Talk and Nation Sports Blog presents the 30 Clubs, 30 Previews MLB special, and we'll see you guys later.